Hello, friends. My name is Iris Josephina. I'm your host, and you are listening to the Planting Seeds podcast. On the Planting Seeds podcast, we explore how we can cultivate a more gentle relationship with our cyclical bodies, the earth, each other, and the world around us through using our senses, science, the subtle, and the sacred. On Planting Seeds, we talk about all those topics you've always wanted to talk about. We are shamelessly opening up the conversations that we all so desperately need to settle in our precious bodies and relate to each other in a more open, truthful, and empowered way. I'm so glad you're here today. Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Planting Seeds podcast. Today I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Rachel Vong, who is a licensed naturopathic doctor practicing in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And her passion and area of clinical focus include thyroid disorders, specifically hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's thyroiditis, digestive health, and hormone imbalance. Having struggled with debilitating anxiety, burnout, and a variety of gut issues for several years, it has become her mission in life to help guide and empower other women to take charge of their own health so they can live a life that they love. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
So you are a naturopathic doctor and you specialize in thyroid health. And I'm very curious, what brought you here? What has your journey been like?
Well, I always say that I think that people with thyroid issues kind of found me. When I first started out about 7 to 8 years ago, I was seeing a variety of women. And at some point, I started noticing that the same kind of women kept coming into my practice. You know, the exhausted woman, the woman who couldn't lose weight no matter what they tried, the woman who had her hair falling out all the time. And yet there was no explanation. They felt kind of deflated and desperate for an answer because their conventional doctors weren't giving them any. And so when we did a deeper look, and with naturopathic medicine, we love to be a little bit more thorough with our investigation, I found that a lot of these women were experiencing thyroid issues. And so I found, I was thinking, if I'm seeing this many women with undiagnosed or unmanaged thyroid issues, then how many more women are actually out there suffering and also desperate for answers? And so I saw a huge gap, a gap that needed to be filled. And a lot of women were just falling through the cracks. So I decided to do what I could to fill that gap. And it's been so rewarding and fulfilling. And that's kind of how I found thyroid health.
Thank you for sharing that. And, I think that there is a lot of people listening right now who kind of know that the thyroid exists and that it sits in our bodies. But I also feel that a lot of people actually may not have like a good understanding of the role of our thyroid in our body. Mm-hmm. And then later we can also talk about the connection between our thyroid and our menstrual cycle. But maybe it's good to bring it back to basics starting off and explain to people, what is the thyroid and what does it do in our bodies?
Yeah, I find it's an organ or a gland that isn't talked about very much, and yet it has such immense, so many different actions and activities in our body. So the thyroid gland, it sits at the base of our neck, and its responsibility is to regulate our metabolism. So every single cell in our body actually responds to thyroid hormones, which is why when we have a thyroid issue, we notice symptoms from head to toe. And so when we have enough thyroid hormones in our bodies, our metabolism is working well, our temperature regulation is working well. But when it's not, and we start having an underfunctioning thyroid, that's why we notice our metabolic rate goes down and we start gaining weight. Our energy goes down because our energy production isn't optimal. We start feeling more cold because our temperature regulation isn't working well. So that is primarily the role of the thyroid. However, like I mentioned, it affects every single part of our body.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I think a lot of people have no idea that the thyroid is at the foundation of so many functions in our body. Mm-hmm. And I'm also curious whether you could go into the connection between our thyroid and our menstrual cycle. You already touched upon metabolic health, like metabolism. And obviously we understand that our metabolism is really closely related to our menstrual cycle. But I was wondering, could you go into thyroid health and menstrual cycle health for a bit?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, like I mentioned, the thyroid does affect every part of the body and, our ovaries included. And it even affects the way our brain communicates to really special organs in our body that regulate our menstrual cycles. So, our brain sends signals to our ovaries to produce certain hormones. But when we have an underfunctioning thyroid, what can happen is that it can change the way our brain releases these signals and how it communicates to those reproductive organs. And so a lot of the times we have increases in certain hormones, which will then actually inhibit ovulation. That tends to be one of the most common effects, I would say, from having an underfunctioning thyroid on the menstrual cycle. And so when we don't ovulate, that's going to cause a lot of hormonal imbalances. It can cause changes in our periods. So a lot of women with hypothyroidism, they tend to have either really, really heavy, painful periods, or some don't have periods at all, or they're very irregular. So that's how I find that thyroid hormones can affect the menstrual cycle. In kind of related to that, it can also affect the way our bodies metabolize our hormones. So when we produce hormones in our bodies, they are often metabolized by our liver and they get excreted from our bodies. And that's how we keep a really nice optimal balance of our hormones, which keep us happy, which keep our cycles regular. But if we have issues now with the metabolism of our hormones, for example, estrogen is one of our dominant female hormones. And, we don't want too much of it. We don't want too little. But when we start having issues with getting rid of this estrogen, that becomes a problem. And having too much estrogen in our bodies can cause changes in our cycles. It can cause changes in our mood. Our PMS gets worse. So you can see how the thyroid can directly affect our ovaries and our menstrual cycles, but also indirectly affect them through other organs, which is why, again, the thyroid is just such an important organ that we have to keep optimal.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I also see it all the time in my own practice, like how this connection kind of like plays out in people's bodies and the things that they experience in their bodies. Mm-hmm. And you mainly work with hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, and I feel maybe it's good to explain what these conditions are and how they manifest in the body and how people could potentially recognize any signs or symptoms of the body when this may potentially be going on, because these issues are so often underdiagnosed.
100%. Yeah. So first, I think it would be a good idea to explain what the difference is between hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, because I find a lot of people use them interchangeably, but they don't realize that there is a little bit of a difference. So hypothyroidism just basically means you have an under-functioning thyroid. You don't have enough thyroid hormones that are actively working in your body. Hashimoto's is one of the major causes of hypothyroidism. It is actually an autoimmune disease. So Hashimoto's thyroiditis basically means that you have an underfunctioning thyroid due to the presence of thyroid antibodies. Now, in our bodies, we're not supposed to create antibodies against our own cells. And when this happens, like in the case of Hashimoto's, we have the production of thyroid antibodies. So these antibodies are then attacking our thyroid tissue and causing damage, which will then eventually result in hypothyroidism. So that's kind of the main difference between the two. Symptoms and signs are the same, I would say, regardless if you have just hypothyroidism or if you have Hashimoto's. But one of the most common complaints that I see in practice amongst women with hypothyroidism and or Hashimoto's is fatigue, like debilitating fatigue. They're tired when they get up, they're tired throughout the day, they're tired when they go to bed, they're just tired all the time. On top of that, they have a really difficult time losing weight. So not only are they maybe gaining weight, but they're also having a hard time just getting it off. And a lot of people say, I used to do X and Y workout. I used to have this kind of a diet and it used to work. I used to lose 20 to 40 pounds every time I did this, exercise regimen or diet, but it's no longer working. And so I hear that a lot. And so, they could be working out super, super hard. And yet, like I said, the weight just keeps packing on and on and on. That's another really common concern. Another one is hair loss. So diffuse kind of like hair loss, they're noticing clumps of hair falling out in the shower, or when they run their hands through their hair or they're brushing their hair, just lots of hair loss. Another one is brain fog. So that like foggy thinking, you can't concentrate, you can't focus. It makes it really hard for you to get through your day, to be productive at work. You're forgetting things. That's also super common. As I mentioned, changes in your menstrual cycle. You might notice heavier periods or you're missing periods. And also, this is another thing I wanted to mention, is that one of the symptoms or signs that I find often go missing or kind of flagged is changes in mental health. So I find a lot of women with thyroid issues tend to have depression or even anxiety. And sometimes these issues can even precede the diagnosis. So a lot of women will start noticing changes in their mood, or like I said, just more anxiety. It's more difficult to sleep. And they go to their doctors and tell this to them, and they're prescribed an antidepressant or a benzo for their anxiety, where really, again, the root cause of it all is the change in the thyroid function. And so this is a really big one that I always kind of want to bring to light so that people know, if you are noticing changes in your mental health, you should definitely get your thyroid function checked out because it could be related. So as you can see, there's so many different signs and symptoms that can result from having an underfunctioning thyroid. And the ones I listed were just some of the more common ones, but there are definitely a lot of others as well.
Yeah, I feel the mental health component is a very important one. And I feel that especially with cyclical and women's health, when something is going on mentally, it is so often not connected to the rest of the body. So I'm so happy that you connect these and that you see this also as a very important sign to notice, when something is potentially changing in the thyroid. And I'm also curious, do you also know something about a thyroid that is working too fast? So a hyperthyroid?
Yeah, so you can have something called hyperthyroidism, which is basically the opposite of hypo, and it just means that you have now too much thyroid hormone being produced. And I would say the most common cause of this is another autoimmune disease called Graves'. So just like Hashimoto's, Graves' also involves the production of antibodies, but these antibodies actually cause an increase in activity of the thyroid gland. And so you start noticing that you have a lot more thyroid hormones being produced. And so if you think about the effects of that, and what you might notice is, instead of a slowing down of things, instead of feeling more tired, you could still feel tired, but you might notice more of a hyperactivity. So a lot of women, or just people in general with hyperthyroidism, might notice much more anxiety, feeling more jittery, on edge. Their heart might be, racing all the time, even, regardless of there being a trigger for it. They're sweaty, they're clammy. Instead of weight gain, like hypothyroidism, a lot of people with hyperthyroidism are actually losing weight for no reason. So that's a really big one, a common issue. So yeah, a lot of opposite symptoms. But what I'm noticing too, and this might be interesting for you, Iris, is that a lot of people who start off with Graves' actually end up developing Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism in the end. So I do find that a good proportion of people who have Graves' or have hyperthyroid symptoms, it's kind of more of the initial stages of their thyroid disease. And eventually, as I mentioned, it progresses into hypo and it stays there as hypothyroidism. So you might notice this as more of just a part of the journey in the progression of the thyroid disorder. So I always say, regardless of what you're experiencing, of what you might be told, if you have Graves', hypo, you want to look at the big picture. You want to do your full investigation to see where this disease is going and hopefully put a halt to it using, more root cause approach.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're saying like finding out about what may be going on in your body, what would be a good way for assessment, for example, in the form of lab testing? Because I know that in the medical system, there is not so much that they're testing. Usually the most standard thing is a thyroid stimulating hormone and then maybe a T3 and T4, and that's it. Could you maybe talk about that and how we could properly test for diagnosis of both hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's?
Yeah. So as you said, the most common thyroid test that's usually done in the conventional world is TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. And that is actually a signal from the brain that talks to the thyroid gland to tell it what to do and how much thyroid hormone to produce. So as much as it is important, we want to know what the brain is doing. It's not the full picture because we don't know what the thyroid is doing. We don't know how the thyroid is actually responding to that TSH signal. So I always say, if you're going to go see your doctor about your thyroid, always make sure that you get a full thyroid panel done. And so what that typically includes is your TSH. You want a free T4, a free T3, and both of those are your actual thyroid hormones. And then on top of that, you want to know whether or not you have these antibodies present. So for Hashimoto's, you want to be looking at anti-thyroid globulin and anti-thyroid peroxidase. Those are the two major thyroid antibodies that are typically elevated with Hashimoto's. And then one more test that I usually like to ask for, which again is not very commonly done, is something called reverse T3. And the way I like to see it is that reverse T3 is like your free T3's evil stepsister. She does the complete opposite of free T3. So instead of increasing your metabolism, she will decrease your metabolism. So sometimes if your TSH looks normal, your T3 is even within normal, but you have a very high reverse T3, that could be a reason why you're not feeling well, why you have some hypothyroid symptoms. And that will open up investigation into other things as to why your reverse T3 is, elevated to begin with. But I find that is a very complete test that gives us a really good picture of what is happening at the level of the brain and the level of the thyroid. With Graves, another test that is great to test for is something called thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin, or TSI. That's the antibody amongst a couple others that can be helpful to determine whether your hyperthyroidism is due to Graves or, and again, an autoimmune disease. So that's what I would look at as a full thyroid panel, but I wouldn't necessarily stop there. There's a lot of other things that I feel like people should be looking at when it comes to thyroid health, like related nutrients and all that. For example, iron is so important for thyroid health. You need iron to create thyroid hormones. So if you are iron deficient, which a lot of women tend to be, especially if you have heavy periods and you're losing a lot of blood every cycle, then that can cause a slowing down of your thyroid gland, regardless of if you have even an overt hypothyroidism or not. So that's something really important to look at. And then another thing I would look into is vitamin D. And this hormone is so important and definitely undervalued, I think, in the conventional world with regards to hormone health. So that's quite a complete panel there, amongst a few other things.
Thank you for sharing that. And also thank you so much for adding in the iron and the vitamin D, because that was actually my next question that I wanted to ask you. Like, would you recommend to test some minerals or other vitamins because they're connected to the thyroid? So I'm very happy that you did mention that. And I was also curious whether you have any tips for people for when they go to their doctor, because we all know it can be hard to actually get the tests that you deserve to get to know what's going on in your body. Do you have any tips for people on how to make sure that they actually get the tests that they want?
This has been like a never-ending battle, I think, because of course, like every doctor is different. The way you approach and have a conversation with every doctor is just, there's like little nuances and stuff there. And it depends on like the relationship that people have with their doctors. So I will admit, like with some cases, it's very difficult to get what you want. And sometimes I just say, if that's the case, move on to someone else and keep looking for another doctor who will take the time to listen and be proactive with you. Otherwise, I'd always just say, paint a picture, kind of like fight your case, like explain exactly what you're going through. If you have the time to do a little bit of reading, come with some knowledge and show your doctors that you know what you're talking about. And, you can give a little bit of explanation as to why this might be important to do. And kind of like what we just discussed today in this podcast, like there's a lot of little tidbits there that you can take to the doctor's office and explain why these tests are important for you to do. And at the end of the day, remember that you have to advocate for yourself. It is your health and you have the right to know everything that's happening in your body, and also the right to know, what might be going on so that you can be proactive, because you don't want to wait until it's too late. Of course, there's things that you can do, but the earlier you catch whatever's going on, the better, because there's just so much more opportunity for you to, again, stop or reverse the progression of thyroid disease. So yeah, I don't know if that helps, but it's tough. It's very difficult.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think we both see that with our clients, like how hard it sometimes can be to just, get a simple blood test done. Like how difficult can it be, But thank you for sharing your views on that. And I'm totally on the same page. And then I also wanted to ask you, and you've mentioned it briefly just now as well, like, do you believe or do you think it is actually possible to heal or stop or reverse things like hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's? Because it hasn't been in the body always. It progressed at some point. And I'm curious what your take on that is. Or do you think that this has always been dormant in the body and all of a sudden it comes out?
So everyone's going to be different with this, because the way it comes about is very unique to the individual. People with, I would say, a family history of Hashimoto's, there's a very strong genetic component to it. So if you have a mother or an aunt or a sister with Hashimoto's, then your risk of developing it is quite high. And sometimes it just takes one trigger, one trauma, stressful event, infection, surgery, whatever it might be, to bring on the development of Hashimoto's. And in those cases, it can be very hard to necessarily reverse. That being said, I always say, regardless of how it came about, what your history is, there is always opportunity to still have a very beautiful quality of life with Hashimoto's. There's so much that you can do, that you have, within your power, within your control, to ensure that you optimize your thyroid function as best as you can, and you do all the things to keep your symptoms at bay. And so, again, regardless of where you're at in your journey, there is always going to be something that you can do. But of course, in some cases, like I've had patients who, when caught early, we've been able to get them off their meds or get their antibodies all the way back down to normal. And they basically are now Hashimoto's free, if you will, It's possible. It's not always the case. And I don't ever want to say that, I can guarantee that. It just really depends on the individual and their specific circumstances. But regardless, you can still have an amazing quality of life.
Thank you for that. And what would you say are like simple at-home things that people could do to support their thyroid? Of course, there is a wide variety of things that we can do that we both know, but I'm very curious about your take on what is an easy, simple way to support our thyroid on the daily.
So there are just, like you said, there's so many things, but, if we're keeping it super simple, I would say, if possible, the best thing that you can do for your thyroid is to slow down. Like, I kid you not, just getting into the practice of taking time for yourself, slowing down your go, go, go lifestyle. That is going to do more for your thyroid than you know. Because I find one of the things that drives thyroid disease so much and is also responsible for the onset of thyroid disease is chronic stress. And, people who are very, very busy, who don't know how to slow down, who don't know how to prioritize time for themselves, they tend to fall victim to this. And so if you can actually change your mindset, change your priorities around this, that is going to set you up for so much success. All the other stuff like diet change and exercise and all of that, in my opinion, almost come later, because this is the foundation. If you're taking all the right supplements, if you're eating clean, if you're exercising, but you still are so stressed out of your mind, you're only going to get so far. So this is the one message that I have to just shout out from the rooftops. And I think it's partly because of my own experience with this. Like, as you mentioned, I suffered from really bad anxiety. And a big reason for that was because I pushed myself into burnout and I wasn't living a very health promoting life, I would say. Like, my priorities were very different at the time. Anyway, so when I changed my mindset and my priorities, that shifted everything for me in terms of my health. So that was the catalyst for me. And I think that just from my experience with patients, that also is the catalyst for them in their success with their thyroid disease. So that would be the main one, I would say. Apart from that, getting enough sleep, kind of similar, but getting enough sleep is so important for your thyroid function. If you don't necessarily have issues falling asleep, staying asleep, but you're just choosing not to go to sleep, that is something that you have within your power, within your control to really adjust for, and can make a huge difference in your thyroid health. So getting at least 7 to 8 hours every night is really great for thyroid health. Having a nighttime routine to help unwind and get into sleep, all of that's important. Another thing is, instead of waking up and starting your day with coffee, swap it for some lemon water and have your coffee with or after your breakfast. That is also a game changer for a lot of people with hypothyroidism, because after an overnight fast, if you put coffee into your system, you are going to put your body into more stress. And as I mentioned before, stress is a really big aggravator and will exacerbate all of your thyroid symptoms. And so if you can swap out that coffee in the morning for some nice lemon water, it stimulates your digestive processes, it's good for liver detox, and have your coffee with a meal, that is going to blunt the effect on your adrenals, which is your stress glands, and will set you up for a much easygoing day.
Thank you for mentioning all of this again. And I feel like for almost all hormone stuff that comes up in our lives as a person with a menstrual cycle, the basics are so similar. Mm-hmm. And it's actually pretty simple. I have the feeling that so many people these days are looking for like very complex ways to heal their bodies and all the difficult steps. But it's, as you say, it's in the slowing down.
Yeah.
And in really doing all the things that we have to do anyway for our bodies, like eating and sleeping.
Right.
In a more mindful, slow way, and really taking the time for it. I have the feeling that so many people these days don't take the time anymore to have a nice meal, sit down while they eat, take the time while they eat. And also, like you say, it's a choice, like at what time you go to bed.
Yeah, exactly.
We choose. Like as adults, we can literally choose to go to bed at 9 p.m. Like I went to bed at 9 p.m. last night, and it's the best thing. It's really the best thing.
Yeah, and you're right. Like I feel like everyone's just looking for this complex protocol that they have to follow, this really hard diet that they have to do where they cut out a million things. Like it doesn't have to be that way. It can be simple. And that's like one of my mottos, like feeling great in your body can be simple. It's just that we've forgotten about the foundations. As you mentioned, sleep and eating and slowing down and taking time for yourself. Like all of these things are at the foundation of our health. We should not be working on all the other fluff. We need to work on the foundations first and then move up from there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And to end, I would love to ask you, like, is there any wisdom, body or thyroid related or both, that you want to give to people? Like, is there anything that you would like to say to people who are like struggling with their thyroid or are assuming that they have thyroid issues? What is the wisdom that you want to share with them?
don't give up in finding answers for yourself. Don't settle for mediocre health. That is like the number one thing that I would say is that, as I said before, you can live an amazing life. You can be symptom free. You can do all the things that you want to do in this life, even with Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism or whatever health issue that you have. It's just that you haven't found the right approach yet. And it's unfortunate that the conventional approach to things is very much treatment oriented. It's not proactive. It's not a root cause approach. And people believe it and they go with it. And they believe that this one pill is going to take away all of their strife and their, concerns and issues. But it's not usually the case. And people are let down and disappointed time after time. But that's the way it is. You cannot rely on this one pill approach. You have to look at your whole health. And because you haven't done that yet, it's probably why you're still suffering. And so that's why I say, don't give up. Find the right practitioner, find the right resources to help you understand more about your body, because I'm all about, knowledge. And I think knowledge is very empowering. And so keep digging, keep learning more about your body. And then from there, you can start making very intentional decisions on a day-to-day basis that are going to put you on the right path forward. But yeah, don't stop. Don't give up. Trust in your body is what I always say.
I love that. And I think more people should hear that. It's like some Post-it that I want to have on my fridge and on my computer.
I love it too.
Yeah, to just not forget. Because I also feel that because the system works in the way that it does, so many people lose trust in their bodies and stop believing that their bodies are actually also the place of healing.
And I always say believing in the system that way, it takes your power away. And we believe that we have absolutely no control over our health, that we think that this synthetic thing is what's going to do it. But no, it's all in you. You have the control. You have the power to change the course of disease, to change the outcomes of your health. You have to believe in that, and trust that your body is doing the right thing all the time. Our bodies are there's just such an innate wisdom in there. It knows what to do. We just forget about that. And we don't trust enough in our bodies. And all the signs that we feel, all the symptoms that we have, they're just messages from our body telling you what needs to happen, what's wrong with it. And so when we listen more to that and we become more intuitive in our bodies, it's guiding us to where it needs to go. Some people can actually intuitively feel what foods are right for them or what foods aren't, right? If we just have to just listen. And so, yeah, it's important to be more in tune with ourselves for sure.
I totally agree with everything you just said. And I feel we are so much on the same page when it comes to looking at our bodies, how we support and help our bodies. And for anybody who is listening, who is thinking they have issues with their thyroid or they have been diagnosed, but they're not really helped in a way that feels okay for them, go find Dr. Rachel. She's on Instagram. She's online. You can find her. Could you maybe share where people could find you so the people on here know who to go to if they have any issues?
Yeah, so I have Instagram. And so if you can follow me at Dr. Vong, ND, so it's DR, V like Victor, ONG, N like Nick, D like Doctor, Dr. Vong, ND, that's my handle. Yeah, I post there every day with free content. I also have a free Facebook group called Natural Support for Hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. So you can join that too. And there's a great community there with all like-minded women who are trying to find answers. And so I try to give as much free resources as possible. But of course, I also offer services if people want to work closer proximity. If they need the support, I'm there for them as well.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for coming on here to share your wisdom and your knowledge about the thyroid. And I hope that everybody who's listening has a bit of a better idea about what the thyroid is, the function it has in our bodies, and how we can notice when our thyroid is maybe asking for our attention. So thank you again so much, Rachel. This was really helpful, and I'm so grateful you took the time to come on here.
You're so welcome. I loved this conversation so much. So thank you for inviting me on here, Iris.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, with your friends, with your family, post about it on social media, or leave a rating or a review on all the platforms. To catch all the latest news from me, you can follow at the Planting Seeds podcast on Instagram or at Cycle Seeds on Instagram, or you can go to my website www.cycleseeds.com. Thank you again so much, and I'll see you next time.